The date is 30th of January 1945. World War II is coming to an end, and Germany is getting suffocated from both sides. It's at this time when the German government tells the people of Eastern Prussia, which is an exclave to Germany, that you need to immediately leave and come to mainland Germany. And the reason for that is because Russian soldiers are approaching that area and they will be there shortly. There was no hope for the people of Eastern Prussia, except this ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff. The plan was for the Wilhelm Gustloff to pick up thousands of people in Eastern Prussia and go to the city of Kiel in northern Germany. Thousands of people got into this ship, but they didn't know what was to be expected in a few hours. About 10,000 people board this ship, and between all these people there is a little 10-year-old boy named Horst White. In Horst's pocket there is a Swiss army knife, which is very important later in the story. The people that are boarding this ship aren't very stoked about this. They know what they're getting into. They have suffered war for about 6 years now, and they know there is no hope for staying alive anywhere. Like for example, Horst White's father died in the war recently, so they were not in the best situation. About 10,000 people board the ship and they head towards northern Germany. It only takes a few hours, and all of a sudden, a German submarine is in the area, and it's at this moment where the Wilhelm Gustloff is hit. Horst White, the 10-year-old boy on the ship, explains that all of a sudden we heard a loud boom and water started to come in. So I immediately told my mother, let's go on the top deck where the small boats are so we can be safe. The worst part about this, there was only 22 lifeboats on this ship, and because of the explosion, half of the ship was in the water already, and that means half of the light boats were already underwater and inaccessible. But since Horst White and his mother were women and children, and they were one of the very first ones to show up, they got in one of these lifeboats. Another problem is that inside these lifeboats, only 70 people can fit. So there was a lot of tossing and turning and fighting between the people so they can save a spot on the ship. The people in charge couldn't handle everybody, so they decided to hit them in the head to knock them out so they don't fight with each other. And the worst part is, the weather is extremely cold since it's January, and if you're in the water, you will die of hypothermia very quickly, just like the Titanic water. Another huge problem they face is that the mechanism and the rope that allows the lifeboat to lower is frozen and they can't lower it. This is exactly when Horst White's Swiss army knife comes in handy. Because of his knife, they could cut the rope that was frozen so the ship can get lower. And without that Swiss army knife, this was not possible. So Horst White saved the lives of about 100 people. Horst White and his mother and about 1,000 people were saved, but there was 10,000 people on this ship. So more than 9,000 passengers died. They were either dead on impact, they drowned to death, or died in the frozen waters because of hypothermia. 9,000 dead is insane in a ship. The Titanic had about 1,500 dead. And that's why the sinking of Wilhelm Gustloff is the deadliest marine disaster in history. It was because of the S-13 Soviet submarine that shot 4 torpedoes towards this ship that allowed it to sink this fast. The whole point of shooting these torpedoes was to for sure sink this boat, because if they were in their right mind, they wouldn't shoot 4 torpedoes towards a passenger ship. But the question is, why is a disaster like this not known by the entire world? It's barely talked about. Why is that? In the Titanic, 1,500 people died and they made movies and documentaries about them left and right. But there's not one proper movie about the Wilhelm Gustloff. To understand why that is, we first have to learn the history of the ship. In the year 1936, when they built this ship by the company Bloemenbos, they wanted to name it Adolf Hitler, because at this time, he was pretty much the most powerful man in the world. But Hitler declines this name. He tells the ship company to name it Wilhelm Gustloff, basically the leader of the Nazi party in Switzerland. that was allegedly killed by a Jewish student. It was basically a type of propaganda by the Nazi Party to put Wilhelm Gustloff on there because he was quote-unquote a martyr for the Nazi regime. And it was a huge boost for the Nazi propaganda to tell the people that Jewish people are anti-German. But anyways, in 1936, this ship enters the water as basically a cruiser, and it was available to the German people. But it actually wasn't available to all Germans. It was actually available to only close friends and family members to the Nazi Party. So even though they claimed that this is a National Socialist country, they didn't care about the normal people. And another interesting thing about the ship is that there was no class. 100% of the ship was the same. And that's what the message was behind their regime. And another thing, the only non-German people that could board this ship was the Austrians that were part of the Nazi Party. The occupancy of the Wilhelm Gustloff was only 1,900 people, and that's insane because when it sank, there was 10,000 people in there. 3 years later, in the year 1939, World War II began, and this cruiser ship wasn't used anymore, and that's for obvious reasons. So it basically turned into somewhat of a hospital and a carrier for hurt soldiers. So it would pick up soldiers around Poland all the way to the Soviet Union, take care of them until mainland Germany. For about 6 years, the Wilhelm Gustloff was a hospital for northern Poland all the way to mainland Germany. And when we get to January 1945, we all know what happens in Eastern Prussia and how the Wilhelm Gustloff sinks. The reasons that the Wilhelm Gustloff is not that famous is because it was supposed to be named Adolf Hitler. Then they put a martyr's name on it. And after all that, when this thing sank, 3 months later, World War II ended, and all the focus went on that. And there was nobody to talk about the Wilhelm Gustloff anymore. And also, the new German government wasn't a fan of bringing the history of the Nazis back, so they didn't talk about it either. And when the Soviets talked about it, they looked at it as somewhat of a victory for themselves to take this ship down. But in international laws, how did a Soviet submarine kill 10,000 civilians in a ship? Their excuse was that this ship was used for military, because for 6 years, it was a military hospital in the waters. And when the ship was struck, there was military officers on board. So technically, this was not a civilian ship, and that's how they got away with it. Another reason where this ship didn't get any coverage is that in World War II, tens of millions of people died everywhere, and 9,000 civilians dying in a ship attack didn't really burst anyone's bubbles, so nobody talked about it. The Titanic sank at a time where there was no disaster going on, so the 1,500 people really showed itself. Stalin once said, "One death is a tragedy, but millions of death is just a number." But this is just a joke. This is an internet meme at this point. But it kind of makes sense. When the number is ridiculously high, you don't really get the same feeling. And that goes on in today's world too, where there's wars everywhere, and nobody really seems to care.